Support for the Dice Tower comes from listeners like you, and from TheOp, also known as USAopoly, and from GameNerds.com. Thanks for your support. The Dice Tower, episode 738.
Games ahead of their time.
Welcome to the Dice Tower, a podcast about board games and card games, and especially the people who play them. On today's show, Geoff shares a story in which perception is everything, and we answer at least one question from the mailbag that gets a little bit horrific. Finally, we explore our top 10 list of games that were ahead of their time. I'm Eric Summerer, and joining me now, the Orville to my Wilbur, Tom Vassell.
I don't know about this, Eric. Okay,
why not?
First of all, well, the part I do like is that you call me the more fun-loving brother.
Yeah, the guy with the popcorn.
Orville. No. That's Redenbacher, right?
Yeah.
No, it says Orville was the younger brother, though, which doesn't make any sense because I think I'm older than you.
Yeah, by slightly. You're a year older than me, but yeah.
Well, that's like eons in
it's getting less and
airplane.
less important as we get older.
That's true. I was thinking about that today, actually, thinking about how I was like, well, if someone in their 45 dated someone 38, no one would really blink at that.
Yeah, no, not really.
But drop 20 years from that, and it's a problem.
Yeah, and like so many of our peers and people that we work with and are friendly with, and like, you're like, wait a minute, you're in your 30s? Oh, okay.
You young'uns. But this actually does not match our title, is my concern, really. Because Orville and Wilbur weren't really ahead of their time. They were their time. See, I don't think the first person to do something is necessarily ahead of the time if they bring it along with them.
That's true.
Which is something I'm going to mention later on when we do the top 10.
Yeah. Well, that's sort of closer to the rule that I followed when we get to our top 10 list.
Oh, you did.
I was just looking for some trailblazers. We'll
the
discuss
people,
it.
on the other hand. But yes, Eric, I have a problem with one of the games in your list, but we'll get to that.
I'm looking forward to it.
But hey, folks, welcome to the Dice Tower. I'm Tom Vassell.
Hi there, everybody. I'm Eric Summerer. Happy Thanksgiving. Hope you had a lovely time if you were celebrating with turkey and or other food-related adventures.
And apparently those of us who were listening to Christmas music in secret may now listen to it in public.
Yeah, we don't play it on the way to Thanksgiving dinner, but on the way back we can play the Christmas music.
Oh, my word. I played it starting November 1st, and I didn't care.
Well, I was listening to a podcast on the way to Thanksgiving, okay? And then
I'm sure your family appreciated that.
Yes.
All right. Well, anyhow, so it is the end of the year. The year is spiraling to an end quickly, but there's some good things about that. Everyone likes Christmas season, or most people like Christmas season anyway. But one of the things we like about the end of the year is we like to talk about the end of the year. I love that. In fact, I spent some time today making up top 10 lists. I did my top 10 kids games, my top 10 surprises of the year, my top 10 thematic games, top 10 productions, top 5 party games, because not a lot of party games came out, expansions, and the best games of the year. It's possible that the best games of the year, some of these lists might change over the next few days, but I'm doubtful.
Sure.
I'm doubtful. But I will say I'm doing all this because of the Winter Spectacular. The Winter Spectacular is happening only 2 weeks from, yesterday. If you, so the Winter Spectacular, if you don't watch our video channel, is one of the 4 spectaculars that we do over the course of a year. And it's 4 days where we play games and do all sorts of things. We play games live. But one of the things we're doing this year is we're going to be doing top 10 lists live. By the way, this is the 13th, 14th, 15th, and 16th of December. So we're going to be playing some hot new games live. We're going to be reviewing games live. This is a new thing we've never done before. We're going to do a 4 Squares review, 4 of them one each day. And then lots of top 10 lists. You'll probably see Eric pop in and other people pop in with their favorite games of the year.
That's the plan.
One of the things we're doing there, folks, and I'm mentioning this now because this contest is still running, but it won't be running for more than a few days after you hear this, is I'm looking to make a video, we do this every year, of the funniest moments from our YouTube videos over the course of the year. So if you would like to do that, all you have to do is email me at tom@dicetower.com. And in the subject line, put best of 2021. And then just give me a link to a video and a timestamp in that video of something that you found humorous.
Ooh.
And then you could be entered. And if you win this, we're going to pick a random winner who's going to get a big box of games. Some good, some bad. Who knows what's in there. But you'll get some stuff. We'll send it right to you once the contest is over and everything. And I will ask, if you enter this, dig deep, right? Yes, we've done, for example, I don't think I need any more of our top 10 worst game names. We know what's in that video. We were all in it. I'm looking for deeper cuts, maybe things that I forgot. Maybe stuff from the beginning of the year, whatever. Anyhow.
Or maybe stuff from Dice Tower Tonight that Tom didn't watch.
I got one entry from Dice Tower Tonight, Eric.
Oh, really? Okay.
I'm not saying it's making the video.
Oh.
I'm just saying at least one person has mentioned a moment.
Someone has sent it in already. Good.
So, I didn't watch that moment, actually. I have been going through and watching all of them, but time is of the essence. So speaking of time, folks, let's get started here. There's no more conventions to talk about. Well, actually, there is.
No, there's one coming up. In fact, in 2 weeks, we'll probably be leading into that.
Yeah, PAX. So Eric's going to be going to PAX Unplugged, and you'll see a few other folks from the Dice Tower there. Tim Metvier from Dice Tower West, Matthew McKeck, and maybe a few other Dice Tower folk will be there, so you can say hi to them if you come across them.
If you can find us.
Tackle them and say hi. Normally
say hi before you tackle us.
Normally I say, just stop us and say hi. But you know what? I'm upping the ante.
Oh, really? Thank you.
Because I won't be there. So anyhow, yeah, there's stuff coming up in the future, and of course our Kickstarter is only a month away and all, but for now, let's talk about some games. So we'll start with a game that, in theory, I should be really excited about because it's one of my favorite themes in the world, but I'm still not. So you're going to have to sway me here, Eric.
Ooh, interesting. Okay, so I mentioned this briefly 2 weeks ago when we were talking about the retreat games. This is the G.I. Joe deck building game. I didn't talk much about it at all, just that it exists. This is a deck building game from T.C. Petty III, who does a lot of development work for Renegade Game Studios. They're the publishers. The art for the G.I. Joe game is Robert Atkins. It's a very comic book style G.I. Joe art of the various characters from the game. This is a fully cooperative, I hesitate to call it tower defense, but it's like threat mitigation game. You each have a character, your main primary Joe that you are playing, Scarlet or I'm totally blanking. You can be Snake Eyes. You can be any one of a number of Joes that has a basic version, and you can even pay to upgrade your Joe to become a more powerful version of that card. You also have a bunch of basic Joes in your deck and action cards and stuff, and that's how you start the game. You also have a whole bunch of nastiness that is going to show up and be both group tasks and personal tasks that get placed in front of you that are threats to you. And if you don't deal with them, nasty stuff is going to happen. There's sort of a plot with some random events and some that are always the end of Act 1, end of Act 2, end of Act 3 points that go in this deck. And you have to work your way through that deck, complete Act 3, and win the mission. Now, you do this by sending your Joes on missions. You have transportation cards that you start out with one very basic transportation, like a Jeep, but you can get more into your deck, which then can go into a communal hangar, and they can hold a certain number of Joes. So you say, I'm going on this mission, I'm going to try and fight Destro, for example, and you play down your Jeep, and you say, I can hold 4 Joes, so I can play 2 of them, and other players from around the table can also add characters into this mission, and you all pool your resources to try and defeat the bad guy. There are some random elements, some complication cards that can show up. They start out face down and you might have to deal with them. They can make the guy more difficult. They can eliminate your Joes that are on the mission. All sorts of nasty stuff can happen. But hopefully you manage to survive and end up succeeding at that particular either the complication that you're dealing with or the mission that you're trying to complete.
Quick question. At the end of the game, is there like a little deck of cards that you flip one over and it teaches you a valuable life lesson?
I want to say that's an expansion. Not in the base game. Oh. Not once did we say, and now we know. We really should have, though. But the problem is, if you leave these threats too long, they're going to start to pile up. So it's one of those that at the beginning of the game, you're like, oh, this is simple, no problem. We can take out these guys. But you really need to spend a lot of time drafting more powerful cards into your deck, almost ignoring the threats at first, because you need the more powerful cards to be able to deal with the later threats. That is not what we did. We sort of said, let's go after this and start taking down bad guys, which we did very easily in Act 1. And then Act 2 comes in, more complicated complications and nastier bad guys and tougher missions. And it got very difficult very quickly, and we got overwhelmed. I like it. Thematically, it's cool. I like working together, pooling your resources. I'm strong in this particular regard. You've got stats on your various Joes, and so one mission might be stealth. You need stealth, and you're trying to roll. You're rolling dice to succeed or fail at some of these missions. So the stronger you are in a stat, the better you're going to do at a mission. So I might be strong in stealth, and you might be strong in heavy weapons, and we can work together to try and complete all of the missions on the table. But you definitely need to increase the ability of your deck. Do not rely on those basic Joes for very long. You need to upgrade because it's a difficult game. It is not an easy one to win. Sometimes the dice are going to be nasty to you, and sometimes they're going to work out. I like it. I don't like it as much as the Transformers game, but I think a lot of that is just me liking the Transformers IP better than G.I. Joe. This is a different challenge. It's a different game entirely, for sure. And it's one that I need to work a little harder at getting good at, for sure. That's the G.I. Joe deck building game.
I don't normally ask this, but give me a number here.
I'm saying, of both of them, I'd say I'm at a 7 for the G.I. Joe and an 8 for the Transformers.
See, I guess, I wanted a G.I. Joe game. Just deck builder wasn't what I wanted.
Yeah.
I like deck builder games. Don't get me wrong. I love deck builder games, but I don't know. And from, the same, I don't know. You haven't sold me yet because you're not loving it. See, the fact that you like it and say it's fine doesn't sell me on it.
That's true. I'm not running out and saying you have to play this game.
All right.
Yeah.
Alrighty. Well, let me jump to a game that I really enjoy a lot. I'm in the middle of playing this right now with my kids, and that's Role Player Adventures. Now, Eric, you've played Role Player.
I've played the original with the first expansion. Yes.
Right. So I want to be clear. This is a completely different game. So what Role Player is? It's the original game and its expansions was a game in which you rolled up a fantasy character. That was the theming of the game. But if you don't like fantasy at all, you can still enjoy the game because it's all about dice manipulation, placing dice on your board to basically make the stats of your character, but you're trying to get very specific stats and meet your alignment and your class and all sorts of different things. And adding and subtracting to these dice. And it's a really fun game, but I don't think you particularly have to like role-playing. If you do, it helps. And when you're done, you're like, aha, here's my character. But it's not necessarily a character you want to play in a game. It's more of a, how many points did I get for meeting the criteria I went out to do?
Right, yeah.
And I really like the game. I think it's a very fun dice manipulation game. There's not a lot out there like it. The closest one that a lot of people like playing is Sagrada. And Sagrada's a fine game, but I like Role Player much better. I think the theme does help me a little bit, but I also find it to be very enjoyable, the way the dice are manipulated. So Role Player Adventures is set in the same universe, which I think is incredibly ironic since role player is clearly based on a generic D&D type setting.
Yep.
So anyhow, you're in this universe. And you can, in the rules, import a character that you made from role player into this game to use it. But you don't need to. Okay. It's more, in fact, I wouldn't even. It doesn't seem like it's worth the time to do that. I guess if I played role player and I'm like, all right, let's do this. But there's like 30 pre-generated characters in the game. I'm very fine with that. So these characters all have a bunch of cards, equipment, and things, and skills. And I mean, the art and everything is, well, it's the same as the role-player games. And you have these characters, and what you're doing is you're going through a story game, essentially. And the best way I can describe this would be if you played the Legacy of Dragonheart. And I can't remember, Eric, if you've played that or not.
I haven't played Dragonheart, no.
Right, so Legacy of Dragonheart from Fantasy Flight Games came out in 2017, was a story game where you went through, made decisions, and did a few things, but, it was mostly just making decisions, a big choose-your-own-adventure with different people. This has some very strong similarities to that. You're a party, and you're going through this story, and this game comes with 12 little books. It comes with a rule book. It comes with 12 books. Each book is an adventure. And you play through 11 of these adventures in a row. There's 10 normal adventures and then one adventure that's like the final adventure. There's also a side quest that you can play anytime after adventure 1. And okay. I'm saving that till like the end, I think.
Okay.
I think we'll do that one at the end. We're just like kind of going through the main one right now. You also have another big book with encounters in it that you can cross. So what happens is there's a map for each of these scenarios, and it's very specific. It's a very specific story that you're going through, and you'll go through, and different things will happen to you. You have to make choices. There are 3 different factions that you can increase in favor and disfavor with. You start out as the King's Guard, but you can kind of tick the King's Guard off, which I'm finding my children seem to delight in doing. Join a secret society and more. I don't want to spoil too much of the story, but the story is very involved. The first scenario is pretty much a tutorial, but after that it jumps full-blown into the game. And so you move around in a map as your party, and sometimes it will have these random tokens placed in the map, and you run into these tokens, and different encounters will happen. And the game does a really good job at remembering things. So, and this is the slightest of spoilers, but we had a chance to kill or not kill somebody at a certain point.
Okay.
So we chose to not kill them. And then later on, we ran across that character again, which wouldn't have happened if we killed them, because the game gives you cards and keywords that... So the game will say, if you have this keyword, read this paragraph. If you don't have it, read this one. So far, I've found no errors in the game in that regard.
Cool.
Because that's always possible in these type of games. Something I'll mention later in this episode. Foreshadowing. But so you go through all this. So it's very much like the Legacy of Dragonheart in that way. And there's different books, and it's very fun so far, the story. The game itself comes from 2 different things. You have skill checks and monster encounters. And so when you have a skill check, there's a book of skill checks. There's like another little booklet. There's a lot of books in this game. A little booklet of skill checks, and it might say, do a dexterity check of level 2 or a bluff check level 1. And then you'll turn to that page in the booklet, and it will show you some spots where you need to put dice, like 1 white 6, 1 red 3, 1 purple 4, and 1 green die. Any number, doesn't matter. So then you as a group, you can spend tokens that you have, these initiative tokens, fatigue tokens. You can spend them as a group to get dice of certain colors. Or you can just randomly pull from the bag. And eventually you get a pool of dice. You roll these dice, and you're trying to, hopefully your roll was good and everything matched perfectly. But as we all know, that doesn't almost ever happen. Then you use these cards from your hand to manipulate the dice. I might say, oh, well, this sword lets me add or subtract 1 from a red. And we needed a red 5, and you rolled a red 6. Easy enough. But wait, we didn't even pull a red die. And then my daughter says, yes, but I have a card that lets me change a white die to a red die. Oh, great. We have a white 6. You change it to a red die. I'll play this card, subtract 1. Now we have a red 5. And that's fun. It really is. I mean, you're going to fail sometimes. Sometimes you just can't do it. And combat's very similar. Combat's kind of the same way, except the monsters hit you, and you can, quote-unquote, die in this game, although death in this game is not quite permanent. You'll see how that works when it happens.
Okay.
And so you're just constantly doing these skill checks and fighting, but you sometimes will use items when you go to locations. And again, choices you make in the past definitely come back to haunt you or help you in the future. We've had to make some choices that I was like, I don't know which one's the best one, but my kids never seem to have any crisis of conscience on this. In fact, at the beginning, they said, we're going to, we don't have to follow the king. The bad guys don't seem like they're really the bad guys. And I think the story is even leaning in that direction, like, are goblins really evil? That type of thing. But my kids are like, we should help them. But then later on, we have a chance to do something really jerky to some people. My kids are like, listen, we might be helping the bad guys, but we're not jerks. Like, all right, whatever suits your moral compass, kids. But we're having a great time going through this. I really like it. So Legacy of Dragonheart did a good job at bringing this sort of thing to the table. But what Role Player Adventures does is it takes it farther than that. And what I think about this game that's interesting is it really isn't that difficult. Now, there's a lot of reading in it, but you could, the rules technically have you pass the books around and read them to different people.
Right.
You could just have one person read it. Let's say I was a young summerer. I would want my dad to read the entire thing.
I'm not sure they do that, but yeah, they perhaps.
And maybe they will. It says here the age of the box is 14 plus. The BGG community says 10 plus, and I very strongly agree with that. And might even think you could go a year or two younger.
Wow.
Because again, it's not so hard. You're working together as a group. We're like, we need this red die we need to turn this red 2 into a blue 5. Is that even possible? I like that sort of thing.
Yeah,
that's interesting, and so it's fun. And after each adventure, you get to level up, and you get more stats and more ways to manipulate dice, and there's familiars in the game that bring in those really cool double colored dice that were in one of the expansions for Role Player.
Okay.
I was very impressed with it. I don't think it's like phenomenally good, but it's fun because I think the choices matter. And I think when we're done, I don't know if we will, but I think we could go back and play through the story again. Some of the stuff would happen the same way and we would know what to do, but we could make some very different choices. So,
okay.
Yeah, so that's Role Player Adventures.
Neat.
From it's Thunderworks, sorry.
Next for me is a game I pulled off the shelf at the Dice Tower Retreat, based solely on the theme and the art. It's called Star Clicker. Designer is Christophe Raimbeau. The art is by Guillaume, G-Y-O-M, not an artist I'm familiar with. The publisher is Ludonate. The theme is that you are kids in a sci-fi universe, and your parents have left the planet on some sort of mission or adventure, and the evil aliens have been watching for this very thing to occur. And they attack while the parents are off on this mission that they're on. And so you, the kids, need to hop in the spacecraft and fly and defend the planet. Except you were never shown how to fly these vehicles. You know that you are supposed to push buttons and the ship does stuff, but you don't know what any of the switches do. Have you ever seen there's a Pixar short about aliens abducting some guy from a cabin in the middle of nowhere? Have you seen that short, Tom?
I don't think I've seen that one. I've seen most of them.
It's an adorable short that Pixar did. I can't, is it called Taken? It's called something. But the alien is manipulating a board that is full of dozens of switches. That's sort of like this. You have a cardboard structure that is your control panel for the ship. Everyone is sitting on a different side of the board. The board is a grid with the planet at the center, and the bad guys are going to come at you sort of Space Invaders style, marching their way toward the center of the board. And you are flying your ship around this grid, and trying to both defeat the enemies and find the, the tracking beacons. You have to discover 8 different tiles on the board. They're hidden at the beginning of the game, and defeat them, destroy them. Now, you have your control panel with a bunch of buttons that are face down at the beginning of the game. They come in clusters of 3s, so you know that this cluster of 3 has a move left, a fire right, and a something that's going to duplicate the value on somebody else's board. Of your 9 tokens, you've got the move up, down, left, right, the fire up, down, left, right, and one that duplicates a face-up token on somebody else's board. So on your turn, you get 2 button presses. And so you poke at one of the buttons, and they're sort of arranged in this rack so that when you push on the token, it flips over, and now you see what it is, and maybe you fly in one direction, maybe you shoot in the direction of one of your friends. But you then get to keep that face up, do a second button press, and remember what those buttons do, because at the end of your turn, they're going to get flipped back down. But now you can remember what they are. And hopefully start flying your ship with some sort of skill as you move around. And so there's a lot of, I need to fly left. Does anyone know where their fly left button is? Because I know where my duplicate button is. And someone's like, yeah, I'll fly left first. And then I'm like, okay, I'm duplicating your fly left, and I can shoot and fly and maneuver around and complete the mission. That's about it. Each turn after everybody goes, the bad guys move forward. And so you have to sort of maintain the status quo and not let the bad guys get too close. Well, you need to mention
that sometimes the bad guy mixes your buttons up.
There is that. That is one of the effects of the bad guy cards, is that sometimes they'll mix things up, which is frustrating, I will accept.
Well, I think it's actually necessary because otherwise the game would be too easy.
It would be too easy. There are 4 difficulty levels to this game. I only played the basic difficulty level, which is very simple. I think, Tom, we discussed after I had been playing for a little while, you said it seemed a little samey, like you'd seen the game completely and that there wasn't a lot of replay. I think that's definitely the case in the basic version because there's only, I think, 8 face-down tiles in each quadrant of the board, and 2 of those are the things you need, and 2 of them are going to be some nasty tiles, and then 1 or 2 of them are going to be bonuses of some sort, and the rest are going to be empty. And so once you sort of get a plan down in how to explore your board and how to work together, you can sort of get through that basic difficulty level without too much trouble. The second level adds some player powers. The third level makes it a little more difficult. The fourth level, I think, is the real game. And that allows you to actually block off the entry points of the bad guys. But I feel like they thought that was maybe too complex for a family weight game. But I think that's where the actual replay might come in. I am very much charmed by the theme. I've never played a game quite like this before, just punching buttons and let's see what they do. It's a lot of fun to try and maneuver your thing around. And sorry, Frank, I just shot you. But I agree that the basic game is almost too simple and would get samey after a while. I would like to play this with my kids at some point. That is Star Clicker from Ludinate.
How am I supposed to say anything, Eric, if you're just going to talk for both of us? And then well, Tom said this, but here's my response to that.
I'm just trying to head off your criticism.
No. Well, here's the thing, though. I think the game is fine. It's just that it's hard to promote buying a game where I think you've seen almost everything after 2 plays.
There is that danger. I mean,
and there's a lot of cooperative games out there. This is great for maybe a convention, where you're like, let's try it out. That was fun. And then you move on to the next game. Yeah. I am concerned about that, though. I'm not sure the full game's in 4. I also think there is a good chunk of luck. You can have a really bad game.
True.
There's it like many. This is an interesting thing. I mean, I don't want to get too much into this, but we've talked about this before. Like, is it fun to play a cooperative game that you cannot win? Like where if you turn over you go back and you look at every single decision you made and you're like, there's nothing we could have done. the game was against us from the beginning. Is that acceptable?
Yeah, I mean, that's frustrating, for sure.
I mean, it can happen with every game. I think there are pandemic games that are unwinnable.
Well, certainly in the higher levels of, what's the other Matt Leacock, the Forbidden Island, if you're playing that at the high level and you don't play a perfect game, you are not going to win.
Yeah, but it might not even be a perfect game. You may not be able to win some games.
Yes.
Anyway, I don't mean to run down a rabbit trail there, but I'm just saying that when there's more luck, then there's a stronger possibility that will happen.
Yes.
All right. Well, I do like the game. I wonder about that. Alrighty. The other game I want to talk about today is Gutenberg. And I was really excited about this one when I saw it in the Essen previews, because the theme of it, which is about printing presses, being a pioneer of printing, and the fact that the game came with these little wooden tiles that look like the little print tiles, whatever you call those, the little wooden blocks that you put into
like the movable type pieces?
Yeah.
Oh, neat.
So it comes with a bag of those. Now, you know what those are? Those are literally just tiles in the game. But I like them anyway. So what this game is it's a probably maybe a little bit more than medium weight game in which you're trying to get the most points, and you're doing that by printing jobs. And so jobs are usually, there are two cards that are combined. One card will tell you what letters you need for the job, which is always some collection of vowels, A, I, O, and U. For some reason, there's no E. I'm not sure why. Maybe because E's look like A's. I don't know. Anyway, some combination of vowels. And then the other one will tell you what colors and other things that it might need. And they're combined. So two cards together combined to make a job. You need to do all the letters, but the other card, you don't have to do everything on it. So you might get partial credit from doing some of it or all of it, whatever. Now, the way you do this, the whole game has an auction mechanism, which I really like. There are like 6 phases in this game. And so behind your screen, you put black cubes. You get a bunch of black cubes, and you put them on each phase. And then you reveal them. And whoever, like the first phase will let you pick jobs. There's 4 available jobs, for example. And in a 4-player game, whoever puts the most black cubes in that spot gets to pick first. And the second player gets to pick second, and so on. So that's a nice mechanism. You have to decide, I really want this, or I really want that. I want to be the first person to be able to do this, on the different positions. But ties are broken by first player. So that's a pretty big deal, because ties are going to happen in this game a lot. But what they do is the first player has the fewest cubes. Second player has 1 more. Third player has 1 more. Fourth player has 1 more than that. So that evens out beautifully. Because as the fourth player, I'm going to lose every tie to everybody. But I have more cubes than everybody. So it's just a fun thing as you sit there and try to outthink. And sometimes you'll be like, I really want to, pick the job first. So I'm going to put 6 black cubes. You reveal, and everyone else put 1. And you're like, oh, well, I could have put 2. But it's not that big of a deal. You still get to go first. So there's that. And so it's a little bit of an economy where you're buying different tiles, these different vowels, and collecting little color ink tokens. Each player has a special ability that they can use. And there are gears in this game, Zulkanish gears. You can each have 3 gears in front of you, and you can use one section of the gear in each round of the game. You rotate the gears, which if you rotate one of them, it pushes the other 2, which, come on. You got to admit that's just fun to do, right?
That is fun to do.
And then you get to use the actions of the gears that are facing the outside. And there's some special abilities and things that let you rotate more of them. You also have like a little technology. You need to go up these little tech trees, which allows you to do certain jobs and get better bonuses as the game goes by. I really like it. It's not a difficult game to teach and learn. I could have you up and running in this game in probably 10 minutes.
Okay.
But I feel like it offers enough good play. This is going to be one of the games that people remember from this year. There's a lot of games coming out, and a lot of them, I fear, are exciting now and we'll forget about in a year or two. In fact, most games are. But I think this one will be talked about for a bit. So that's Gutenberg. This is from Grana Games and a couple designers whose names I dare not massacre.
Okay. Last for me, Tom, did you ever do one of those how to host a murder games?
No, but I will tell you, I opened this game up with the intent on playing it and said, oh, it's one of those games. I can't do that right now.
Very much so, and I would highly recommend that you treat it as such. What we're talking about is a new series from Renegade called Crimes and Capers. I played the specifically Lady Leona's Last Wishes. The designers are Juliana Moreno-Patel and Ariel Rubin. It has art from Rowena Ivana Rosenberger. And it is sort of like those old school how to host a murder boxes. It is designed to be done as part of a dinner party or some sort of social gathering. You invite up to 6 players and give them a role. There's even costume suggestions where you can dress up like these various characters. In this game, I won't spoil too much because this is sort of a plot-based puzzle. There's some puzzle solving in here. There's some deduction going on. But you have a role, and you can play with fewer than 6. They give you recommendations for which characters to play with. We just played with all 6 because there's a bunch of diaries that you read, and reading the accounting of what happened in this particular circumstance. Lady Leona has passed, and you're trying to discover the fate of her treasure, and so you're sort of reconstructing the timeline of things. And what I really enjoyed about this game is that these different diaries are written in such distinctive voice for these 6 different characters, personages in the mansion. And it was very distinctive. You could really bring it out, and you can bring out characters and speak in silly voices and really bring this to life. It is that style of game. It's almost a role-playing, social role-playing, I guess you could call it. There is, as I said, some puzzle solving. There's some reconstructing of elements. There's some cooperative play that then becomes not so cooperative later on in the game. It's a blast. I'm really impressed with the way this is all put together. This is the only one of this series I've played. There's one set in high school, and I think there's a third one that's not out yet. But Lady Leona's Last Wishes was a blast. I highly recommend, if you're going to do it, that you follow all of their suggestions and turn it into a dinner party. Make it an actual social event and play it up as much as you can, because I think it's worth it.
What's the minimum number of people you'd play it with, you said?
I think they suggested at least 4. I mean, you could play with fewer and just make sure you read all of those diaries. You could certainly play with fewer players and just make sure you read all the material. But you need a certain number of characters to be able to piece together the puzzle. Otherwise, you don't have enough info.
All right. Well, folks, that's the games. Let's keep moving on.
3, 2, 1, go.
It's time for Game Tech with Geoff Engelstein, where we find out how games really work.
Very often our biases can be subtle and seem innocuous. A recent study in the world of sports highlighted this for me. Now, a lot of research has shown bias in the way sports announcers talk about players. For example, a 2001 study showed that college basketball commentators typically describe black players as, quote, naturally athletic, quick, and powerful, while white players are touted for their hard work, effort, and mental skill. Now, both of these are positive statements about the players, but emphasizing different aspects. In general, studies have shown that black athletes are praised more often for their physicality. Now, a striking example was demonstrated recently in a paper presented at the New England Symposium on Statistics in Sports back in October of this year. It caught my eye because, unlike other studies, it wasn't about announcers. It studied sports spectators. And also they looked at both race and gender. Now, the technology they used to do this study was actually pretty nifty. The researchers worked with a firm that had developed technology to take films of soccer games and replace the players with animated computer-generated figures that mimicked the actual player actions. They created animated renderings of the game footage. Then, for the study, they showed some people the actual game footage while others saw the animated renderings. They then asked the viewers their opinions about the games. Now, in the first part of the study, they asked people to watch two different matches. One was the championship match from the NWSL, the National Women's Soccer League. The other was a 4th Division English Football League match played by men. Now, it was impossible to tell the gender of the players in the animated rendering. They look like neutral stick figures. Half the people saw both matches with the actual video of the game, and the other half saw the animated renderings. They were then asked a single question. Which game had a higher quality of play? Which had a higher quality of play? Now, of the viewers that watched the animated game, 60% thought the women's game had a higher quality of play. But when viewers saw the actual game footage completely flip the percentages, that group, now 60% of those thought that the men's game had the higher quality of play. Would those spectators consider themselves biased in this way? Almost certainly not. This is a subtle and unconscious bias. Now, the other study involved a World Cup game between Poland and Senegal. The Polish team had only white players and the Senegalese team only black. Again, half the viewers watched the actual game footage and half watched the animated renders, which gave no indication of the race of the players. The viewers were then asked to rate the teams on 4 different characteristics: which was more athletic, which more organized, which more physical, and which more technically skilled. The biggest difference came when asked which team was more athletic. Well, when watching the actual game footage, 70% of people thought Senegal was more athletic. But in the renders, 62% of people thought Poland was more athletic, almost completely reversed. Now, for the more organized category, when watching the renders, 28% of people thought Senegal was more organized. But when they could see the real players, that dropped in half to 13%. The other two characteristics, more physical and more technically skilled, the statistics remained about the same regardless of whether people were watching the renders or watching the actual video. Now, I would hazard a guess that most people who participated in the study would be surprised to learn that their views were skewed by whether they could see the gender or race of the participants. But the value of studies like this is to drive home that our tendencies as humans lead us to unconscious biases. But exposing and educating people about those biases is the best way to combat them and help people to counteract these tendencies. This is Geoff Engelstein with Game Tech.
Support for the Dice Tower comes from TheOp, bringing you Cuphead, the fast-rolling dice game. From the popular side-scrolling run-and-gun video game, Cuphead comes an all-new fast-action original cooperative dice game from TheOp. In Cuphead, the fast-rolling dice game, you work together to be quick and nimble to avoid the attacks and defeat the bosses to win. Roll to fill your move meter with jump, parry, and attack moves as you battle against familiar bosses, but hurry before the timer runs out. It includes 8 fan-favorite boss decks, custom dice, custom art, and more. Replay over and over again to try and beat your high score. It's a must-have for any Cuphead fan. Cuphead, the fast-rolling dice game, is available now at TheOp.games or your friendly local game store. And don't forget the promo code for Dice Tower listeners. You can get 10% off your entire purchase at TheOp.games. It's available for all games, puzzles, and accessories. Also, free shipping is available on purchases of $49 or more. Offer available for U.S. residents only. Enter the code DICETOWER at TheOp.games. Questions. Michelle begins with what looks like a tale of horror. Hang on a second.
And now, another tale of board gaming horror.
Oh my, that's horrific.
Gather round, children. In grad school, there was a small group of friends who would hang out and sometimes play games. One evening, we were in the middle of a round of Ticket to Ride Europe when the timer on the oven dinged, alerting us to the fact that a freshly made batch of chocolate stuff was ready to be enjoyed. Chocolate stuff is like really gooey brownies, or like a brownie lava cake. It has the crust of a brownie on top, but underneath it is a pudding of molten chocolatey goo. The game was paused chocolate stuff dipped into bowls and served to each person around the table. One friend dipped into their bowl while leaning over the table, and a large drop of chocolate goo landed right on the board. This reality might have been horrific on its own, but instead of grabbing a paper towel or something to wipe up the drip, my friend instinctively leaned down and put their tongue out to lick the spilled chocolate directly off of the game board, while I sat stunned across the table, reaching out in slow motion and screaming, "No!" Here ends the tale of horror. This experience, continues Michelle, has led us to create our house rules of board gaming etiquette, which have grown over time with each experience of something bizarre happening around board games. The first several rules of gaming in our house are: 1. Do not lick the game. 2. Do not drop your cards in your coffee cup twice. 3. You may not sleep on the board game box for extra back support. 1A. An addendum to the first rule became necessary when my son joined our gaming journey at a very young age. Do not eat the cards. I was curious if you all have any base house rules of board gaming that you have acquired over the years from gaming experiences. Shall we pause for that one?
All right.
Do not lick the board is... I'm keeping that rule.
I don't know if I made a rule for that because, I know that a lot of people have food rules because of something that's happened. I don't normally, you know what, those rules usually don't last that long. Like if someone accidentally spills something, which will happen once in a blue moon,
sure.
You're like, all right, everyone be careful with your drinks, come on now. But I mean, you could ban drinks. I just usually have people have them on the floor, or if they're in a bottle with a lid on it or something. But accidents can still happen.
Sure.
We just had a spill happen at Thanksgiving, and it was just an accident. What can you do about that sort of thing? So I didn't have anyone lick the board.
That's why it's a rule, I think.
Sure. No, it's funny and everything, and it makes, for a funny story, as long as you don't take it too seriously. Sometimes when I know from experience, and we'll laugh about it, but when you do something stupid, you may do something stupid to fix that stupid thing without thinking. We've all done dumb things like that. That's how the dumb things compile upon each other. Like if your shirt gets caught in something, you should stop. Not keep pulling and
not try and power through.
But sometimes your brain just like, get out of this situation. You just ripped your shirt off.
Yep. I gotta flee. I don't know if I have anything funny like this. Like, any of my blanket rules are like, please don't bend the cards. Please make sure all of the pieces from one box end up in that box and not get mixed up. It's sort of like, dealing with the children in their games. And instilling that if you're going to take out one game, it has to get put away before you break out the next game. Otherwise, things are going to get mixed up. But that's not very entertaining. Michelle continues with a brainstorming opportunity. I have realized that I quite enjoy games that have mini-game elements within the game. A couple I can think of. Sonora is built around several mini-games. Horrified has the mini-games of the monsters. Super Skill Pinball has mini-games on a couple of the tables, like the Cyber Hack one. And the newly published Rolling Realms is a whole collection of mini-games. What are some other games that you all can think of that contain mini-games within them?
See, I think there's games that have mini-games in them. I mean, the first game is very obvious, Space Cadets, in my opinion.
Yep. That's the one I had ready to go, but I let you have it first.
All right. Well, there's other games like that, but I don't know that I would consider these to be mini games. I don't know exactly what you mean. Like Sonara has different ways to score, but I don't consider that mini games. It's just different things you can do. I mean, if you do that, every Stefan Feld game is going to have that same situation, right? Every Feld game has 80 different ways to score. I don't know that they're all what I would call mini games. But if that's what you consider to be a mini game, Feld games are right there for you.
Well, maybe Michelle really likes being able to focus on, getting really good at one aspect of this game. So say Space Cadets, if you got really good at the flicking part and the weapons control, and maybe weren't so good at some of the other bridge jobs, you feel like you've conquered this section of the game. This is my expertise, and so I'm really good at that mini game part of this.
Our next question is from Kenny. So Kenny says, one of the things that made him decide to write in was my inclusion of Camel Cup in the top 10. He says, I know you know this, but that's not a game, underlined. Were you calling that just to get a rise out of faithful listeners like me? If so, it worked. And if you'll recall, Tom, this is also not the first time you have had an exchange in this very subject either, long before the second edition came out, which clearly and forevermore showcases the correct name of the lovely game of Camel Up. So yeah, I was and I'm still right in case there was any doubt, says Kenny. You are currently correct, Kenny, but the game was originally called Camel Cup. And I know this because I went to the source and found that the Chinese company misprinted the side of the box, the cardboard boxes.
Oh.
And therefore, they just decided to go with it. I have that straight. So yes, it is now Camel Up, but it was once Camel Cup. Both names make sense, which makes the whole thing...
Well, that just muddies the waters that much more.
Yeah, I know. But okay, so his real question,
though... definitive answer.
...is, with the rise in popularity and available of digital platforms, like apps, Board Game Arena, etc., do you think this has an influence on the ability for designers, developers to get new games play-tested? Would it be feasible and valuable to have a digital version of a game in development in order to be able to... how do you say that word? Iterate the prototypes more quickly and potentially playtest it to a broader audience more immediately. Do you know of anyone doing this? Curious to see if it would make more sense to get an alpha version of the new game in a digital format while still in the design phase. And yeah, so come on. He says more things, but that's basically the answer to your question, Kenny, is yes, tons of designers are doing this.
Absolutely.
I don't keep track of it because I don't playtest games myself, but I know, especially with COVID happening last year, that this was the only way they were getting games playtested. And they were doing it quite extensively. I don't know how much of this is open playtesting. Sometimes it is. Almost every game on Kickstarter nowadays seems to have some module somewhere where you can just play the game ahead of time. Yeah. Which is one of the reasons that a lot of games have ratings on them before they're even out. Now, is it better to do it that way? I don't know. But I know it's being done.
Well, I mean, I know one of the aspects that makes playtesting and creation of prototypes so frustrating is that you will often put a ton of effort into creating such and such set of cards, for example, and then you suddenly realize after one play that, oh man, that's not working. So I have to fix these 8 cards, and now you have to reprint those 8 cards and cut them and sleeve them and put them all together. Or worse, like the board has something wrong with it. You got to fix that. But in a digital format, if you discover that same thing, it's much less of a big deal. You can simply distribute the new files to your playtest group and begin with the new version of the game. It does make it a lot easier to iterate and to make incremental changes without having to produce a whole new prototype and get it physically out to your group. So yeah, I think it's been quite the tool for designers and playtest groups. Tom, not this Tom, different Tom, says, Kickstarter is becoming increasingly impossible for us Europeans, Belgium in this case is where Tom is, due to shipping costs being so high. And now with a recent change in European laws, VAT, value-added tax, being added after the pledge. It is not uncommon for a game to have extra costs amounting up to half the cost of the Kickstarter itself, frequently even going higher than this. I recently saw one where shipping plus VAT were almost higher than the game itself. Do you think this will have an impact on how Kickstarters will run? Will they look for alternatives for the European market, or are we too small a percentage of backers to consider? I recently saw a Kickstarter going for an alternative way, where a stretch goal was to have localized production in different regions, partly as an ecological incentive. However, they didn't provide details about shipping costs in advance, so the Kickstarter did quite lackluster because of everyone waiting for the stretch goal to be reached. Eventually it did, but very late in the campaign, and then the costs were still almost as high as if it would have been produced in one location. I, for one, decided to stop backing Kickstarters because I can't afford the costs anymore. And usually these games still appear in the market later, usually for a more normal price. Was there a question there?
Well, he says, do I think it's have an impact on how Kickstarters will run? I do. I think shipping is going to be much higher. I think more and more companies are going to charge higher prices for shipping, and I think they should.
Yeah.
As I've said this before, we got just hammered on the Dice Tower this year doing the shipping costs. I'm still paying for that. And we're going to pay for it again when we ship everything out to people, because the amount we charge people for shipping is less than what's going to actually cost to ship to them, which is very discouraging. And so I'm losing a lot of money in that regard. It's going to happen to other people too. So if this is a reason to stop you from backing Kickstarter, I completely understand, although I recommend backing Kickstarters in January. But no, I get it. And yes, you can get the games later, and there's a lot of games that you can get at any given point in time. So if you don't think it's worth it, then you really shouldn't do it.
It's true. It's really, I think, a sense of producers of games and other Kickstarter projects have been absorbing so much of that cost, and they almost can't anymore. The costs were always there, but they've risen to the point that they can no longer be absorbed by the company or absorbed in the same way as they've been absorbed in the past. And now they have to get passed on to the buyers, which I totally agree. If it's costing as much to ship the game as it is to buy the copy of the game, then that's a pretty big disincentive to back a game. And it's probably better to wait until it's available through normal distribution channels where those costs have been worked around or repositioned or absorbed in a different way that makes it less of a hit on the final consumer. Tom continues, with Essen being last week, I had an amazing time being able to go back to my first convention. As you more or less predicted in the beginning of the year, there were almost no American publishers or booths at the fair, and most of the halls were a lot smaller due to several areas being walled off. There were still 5 of the 6 halls open, but all of them contained a lot of empty space. And it wasn't only the non-European booths that were absent. Asmodee, Freedom and Freeze, even the Crokinole and Pitchcar booths were not there. Suffice to say, I was sometimes quite confused with several booths not being in the location they usually were. And this got me wondering about the future of the event. Do you think this year could be a shift for these large events? Will publishers do the math on whether or not it is profitable or necessary to be here? It is very difficult to separate costs from visibility, but I fear that several companies could decide that events like Spiel, and maybe Gen Con, I still have to listen to any information on this, are not worth it, leading to it becoming smaller. I had the feeling that the last Spiel 2 years ago was getting quite large, so maybe this was coming anyway, but it would be sad to see many great and not so great games not being available anymore, or at least at a much higher price. I know it is quite early to talk about this, but I wonder what your thoughts are on this.
I don't dare give thoughts. Not because I'm afraid to, but because I don't know what's going to happen at any given point anymore. The cons ran. Publishers went. Not all the publishers did. The publishers who went all seemed to be thrilled. The publishers who didn't seem upset that they didn't go. Yeah. At least that's what everyone's saying. Nobody has said, I went to conventions and I regretted it. And nobody has said, I didn't go to the convention and I regret it. I can't tell if that's because that's true or, you stick with your decisions. We'll find out next year. But maybe, because we don't know what's going to happen. I can't keep track of this stuff. So I don't know. I will say that if I was making a prediction that 2022 is going to look exactly like 2021. Maybe. I don't know.
I think we've gotten very averse to making predictions at this point. Yeah, no kidding. But I think that I don't think that, say, Spiel or Gen Con is going to bounce back to its pre-pandemic levels immediately. Because there are those publishers and exhibitors that are saying, we saved a lot of money this year by not going to these events. Maybe we'll only do a few this next year, or maybe we'll just wait and see what happens. There is that soft math that goes into, if I go to a convention, regardless of how many actual sales I make, I am getting the word out and getting visibility, and people are demoing the games and they're seeing us there, and then they might go to their FLGS, their friendly store, their local store, or order it from us later, even if we're not making those exact sales at the fair. So it's hard to say, did we make our money back by attending one of these events based solely on what you are selling at that event. There's a lot more to it than that.
So we'll find out. We'll find out. All right, our last question today comes from Gareth, and he played a game of Endangered. This is a cooperative game where you're trying to rescue animals. That's a fantastic game. For many people, I find it to be okay. But anyhow, it doesn't matter. They're trying to save the sea otters. Yay! And they won the game. Everyone's cheering. And then later on, Gareth figured out that they had forgotten a previously drawn card, and if they had paid attention to it, they would have failed in their attempts to save the sea otters.
Oh, no.
Has this ever happened to us, he wants to know. And secondly, does he tell the team that they actually cheated and probably wouldn't have won if they remembered the rule, or should he keep it to himself and act like the win was legitimate? He said, we didn't forget it on purpose, but it feels like a hollow victory. So,
oh boy,
I think I can easily start out by saying, with kids, this has happened to me a few times where I played something with my kids, a cooperative game, and then later on figured out, oh, we didn't do that, because it's with kids. Sometimes you're like running a whole lot of things, and it's easy to miss stuff. Psh,
right.
We won. I don't care. We didn't mean to cheat. Nothing. Yes, some things happen. We won. So therefore, I don't care, and I don't lose any sleep on it at night. There's no reason to be like, hey, kids, the other day when we thought we won, we actually lost. What good comes from that?
Right. As you tuck them in at night.
You whisper in
oh,
their
and by
ear.
the way, you thought we saved the sea otters. We did not save the sea otters. I'm sorry to tell you this. Good night. Sweet dreams.
With your group, I might mention it. I think I would. I'd say, oh, yeah, we probably would have lost. But hey, whatever. We can't go back and change time, so we won. That has happened to me, and that is exactly what I've always said. Because you just can't go back in time and change it.
You can't. No. And usually you discover it as you're packing the game up. Like, yeah, we did it. Oh, that was close. And you start packing things up, and it's like, what do I do with this card? Oh, no. That card we forgot about? We ignore that card. We pretend that didn't show up is what we do.
Right. So, yeah, it's not a huge deal. But, yeah, I wouldn't worry so much about it.
It is. It's interesting, though, that, that sort of error, if it happened not at the end of the game and you detected it, you'd probably say, oh, man, we didn't put these 4 cubes out. Oh, we really need to do that. Okay, and you'd correct it when it wasn't after the finish line. But when the finish line happens and you thought you won, it's a very different emotional point you've reached. Instead of, and also if you had, what if instead of losing the game, you wouldn't have quite, like you still needed to do more? Like, oh, that does it, right? And then you realize, oh no, we actually have 3 more things we have to do. We're not done yet. We're still alive, but we're not done. Is that a little better to go back and correct? Or once you've said we win, we're done. We won. We're packing it up.
Well, there you go, folks. It's time now to go to the top 10.
It's a Dice Tower Top 10!
The Dice Tower's Top 10 list is brought to you by Game Nerds at GameNerdZ.com.
All right, folks, the top 10 games that are ahead of their time, or that were ahead of their time. Now,
Sure.
As I said at the beginning of the episode, I don't necessarily think the first game in a genre is ahead of its time if the next 6 months we immediately see more of them.
Right.
Right? Then that means it's just the first one. Yes, I guess technically it's ahead of its time, but that's not what we mean. When we say ahead of its time, you might think of Leonardo da Vinci, who was drawing helicopters back in the 15th century. That's what we're talking about. Now, they don't necessarily be that far ahead. In board games, a couple years can be a very long period of time. But that's kind of the gist of what we're looking at here.
Right. You have to know defining what their time is sort of like that element of a game becoming popular enough that everyone starts doing it. And if it's just the beginning of the wave, that's not ahead of its time. We're looking for the ripple, and then it's a while before people start to do that same thing.
So to that end, I don't believe we have any game from the last decade. I want to say the newest game on either of our lists is 2007.
I think
which is
you need that level of distance, though, to know this.
I realize that. I would like to say the person who picked the newest game was Eric. But the point of the matter is, I think that's fine. I'm just saying it's, you do. That's why when we get to the People's Choice and the thing, some people put some newer games on there, maybe, but, and even the People's Choice games aren't new necessarily, but they're games that I think immediately had an impact. I don't know that they were ahead of their time, but hey, this makes for good arguments. Go in the comments and tell us what you think. But here are the top 10 games we think that were ahead of their time and why.
Number 10.
We'll begin with my number 10, which I don't get to talk about because it's going to show up on Tom's list because I obviously didn't click fast enough.
I have no idea, as a side note, that you would have put that on your list.
I'm happy to have surprised you after all of these years.
You really did. That was a surprise. Anyway, number 10 for me is Die Macher. So Die Macher is a fairly big, complex Euro game. It's not. I would argue that it's not necessarily complex, but it's definitely long and involved.
Sure.
And people still play it today, not quite as much, but it gets played. In fact, a new version came out a few years ago. But the first version of this game was 1986. There was not anything like this on the market at that point in time. No. And you know what? There wasn't anything on the market much after that was like this. There was a lot of lighter games. There's a lot of different Euro games. It wasn't until almost the late 1990s, where we had Prince of Florence and Puerto Rico coming out in, I think, 2001 and things like that. That's when we started seeing these games take more hold. Die Macher was really kind of ahead of its time. It was about elections in Germany and controlling them. And again, I feel like this game could come out today and it would do okay. So, Die Macher. That's spelled, by the way, Diemacher.
And I think a newer version did come out in the last couple of years. So
yeah. Well, it's the same game, but some minor changes, or maybe some more than minor changes, but it's still essentially the same game. Stronghold did it, I believe.
What I find interesting about Die Macher is that it's still, or at least in my experience, is touted as being really super long and about a 4-hour playtime, which is not a long. I mean, that's not a short amount of time, but there are plenty of games that play that long or more, and I wonder if this is sort of the beginning of that trend of longer games. I guess we always had longer games, but I don't know why Die Macher is highlighted as being such a long game when it's really not that much longer than a bunch of other epic length games.
Yeah. So either way, that's my number 10, Die Macher.
Number 9.
My number 9 is going to show up on Tom's list as well, so I'll just be here in the corner ringing my little bell.
My number 9 is Hare and Tortoise. This won the Spiel des Jahres, actually. I believe it was the first winner of the Spiel des Jahres, and that's because, well, it was fairly innovative. It came out in 1973. It has been remade over the years, and in fact, once in a game in the Dice Tower library, I have version of it is Around the World in 80 Days. It didn't win the Spiel des Jahres till 1979. But this game is a race game, and there's a lot of race games out there, but this one kind of broke the mold and was very mathematical, very much you can move forward or you can move back to get carrots, and you were trying to outthink everybody else. There's a tiny bit of randomness in it, but not much more. There was not many games like this. And in fact, while I think this game has had influence on the market, it took a good chunk of years before we started seeing other games come out like this, which is why I think it was ahead of its time. So that's my number 9, Hare and Tortoise.
Number 8.
My number 8 showed up in the core of the CCG, collectible card gaming craze. That is Netrunner, the original Netrunner game, which was a collectible card game about like cyber criminals and folks trying to break in, hackers trying to break into corporate servers and stuff like that. But it didn't last long. It just sort of got lost in some of the other collectible card games, and the theme didn't really connect. It had a lot of esoteric terms and rules and terminology, and it wasn't until years later when Fantasy Flight resurrected it in the Android universe and it became Android Netrunner that the game really took off. So this is more of a thematic ahead of its time. The style of gameplay that just didn't click at the time, but when the theme and the Fantasy Flight marketing machine got behind it, it really picked up and had a pretty good run as Android Netrunner. But that's why it's my number 8, Netrunner, the original.
Yeah, I thought about this one. I still think that I might slightly disagree with this one because I wonder if it's still ahead of its time.
No, okay.
Although it's kind of a weird thing because it's just so in-depth and so involved as a collectible card game and or living card game. I don't know that it fits in this. I don't know. I don't know what kind of impact it's having on the industry.
Yep.
All right. My number 8 is, a very ancient game by many ways, but it's a game that people still play today, and that's Acquire. 1964. This game is, almost 60 years old now? My word, that is old. And yet, years went by and it wasn't copied much at all. There was a lot of stock market games that came out in the 60s and 70s and 80s, but they were all clanky, unwieldy type games. Acquire was very simple. Draw a tile, put it on the board. Or add it to your tiles, place a tile on the board, connect the different things. Stock market with a visualization grid type aspect. It's been reprinted many times. And, nowadays we're seeing games take some ideas from it. But if you showed this to someone and said, when did it come out? If you showed them one of the modern versions, they would not think 1964.
No.
This game was way ahead of its time. Sid Sackson himself, I should have just put Sid Sackson on the list.
There you go.
Because that's really the truth of it. Sid Sackson is the father of Euro games, which is odd since he was an American. But the point is, he was way ahead of his time with all the different games between this and Can't Stop and many other things. Can't Stop, which is, a lot of Roll and Writes get some ideas, and Push Your Luck games from things that he did. There was a lot of games I considered from him. I thought about putting Sleuth on the list and things like that. But so I put on Acquire. From Sid Sackson.
That's an excellent selection. I probably should have put this on my list. I'm not sure where I would have fit it in, but it's an excellent one, simply because of the time frame. It is such a solid stock game that came out a long time ago. So great selection there.
Number 7.
My number 7 pioneered the workers that are dice concept. That is Kingsburg. You roll your set of dice and you are placing those dice on a grid of action spaces and taking those actions. It is worker placement with dice, but that didn't really catch on right away. Kingsburg was its own thing for a long time, and then we got Alien Frontiers and some of these other games that use dice in really cool, innovative placement ways. But Kingsburg, for a while, was standing on its own, and that's why it's my number 7.
I gotta say, this is a good choice, Eric. I really remember when Kingsburg came out, and I thought, I love this. Where are the rest of the games that do this? And there was nothing. I mean, a few years later, Alien Frontiers came out.
Yeah.
right? And
we got more of a
those...
cluster. After Alien Frontiers, or around the same time, a bunch of things started showing up. But Kingsburg, It was a couple years that Kingsburg was its own thing.
Yep. All right, my number 7 is Eric's number 9, and that is Mystery of the Abbey. Now, Mystery of the Abbey got some pretty wide recognition in, I want to say, 2005 when Days of Wonder printed it, but the game actually was designed in 1995 from Bruno Fiducia. I believe it was a print and play for a while. But this game, which, this alternative to Clue, a game where you have to figure out who done it. And there are a lot of these games today, and they're really cool games to this day, and many games I would probably prefer to play over Mystery of the Abbey. But my word, why did it take them so long? Mystery of the Abbey came out. There should have been more like this.
Yeah.
You could even put a side note on here and say the Days of Wonder version of this showed that you could make a beautiful game like this. And it took many companies a long time to catch up on that. Now, that's not just this game, but this game definitely put Days of Wonder on the map. When I saw this game, my mind was blown that they used colored paper to mark the things down. I had never seen that in my life. Usually you were like, oh, we used the last page in Balderdash. We have to go order from the company more sheets. It was such a pain in the neck. Or you drew your own sheets up.
Yep.
So, yeah. What'd you put in your list?
Well, I think more for the second reason than the first. I had forgotten how far in advance the deduction or the print and play version of this game was. But it was sort of a trailblazer of the more modern deduction style games. But I did put it on more for the production aspect. This was one of the first ones to say, let's just make the prettiest looking game we can. And it was far more common to get the comment of, oh, the game's great. Components are but we're willing to accept it because the game is great. But Days of Wonder said, we're going to make everything just gorgeous in this box and see if it flies. And that took a while for other folks to do that. Now everyone does that and makes the prettiest game they can. But it wasn't the case when Mystery of the Abbey showed up.
Number 6.
Number 6 is El Grande on my list, not because it was a trailblazer in the world of area control. It is one of the grandfathers of area control, but there were lots of area control games in the area, and things followed pretty quickly after, and there were plenty of area control games before El Grande. Why I have it on the list is for action drafting. El Grande, in its basic version, and lots of people play with the expansion, El Grande has a row of actions that show up, and you then have to choose which of those actions you're going to do, which pieces you're going to put out on the board, and in what manner. And it took a while for other games to show up with that action drafting mechanism, Citadels being one of them, I'm trying to think of other examples, but there was nothing for a while that did that after El Grande, which is why it was ahead of its time in this particular regard. Number 6, El Grande.
Yeah, man, I didn't think about that because I thought about El Grande and I dismissed it slightly. I mean, I still think you could have put it on there, but I didn't even think about the action card thing. That's a good point.
Yeah. Well, I sort of, in researching this, I had, again, also dismissed El Grande, but when I was looking at some popular mechanisms, I would then go to Board Game Geek and sort by time and find some of these and suddenly realized, oh yeah, El Grande was way ahead in this particular mechanism. Because I usually play with the expansion that does the action with a deck of cards, with a hand of cards, where you're playing your actions. But in its base form, El Grande is an action drafting game.
My number 6 is Scotland Yard. There are a lot of these games now where you're hunting down somebody. Was looking at this year. A couple of them came out. But Scotland Yard came out in 1983. Also won a Spiel des Jahres. Seems to be kind of a thing here. And man, I played this when I was a kid. And I was like, whoa, what other games like Scotland Yard are there? The answer is none.
None.
Really, there isn't. There wasn't for the longest time. Now someone says, I like Scotland Yard. What else is there? I'll be like, oh, well, do you like Dracula? Because there's Fury of Dracula. Do you want to play a kind of a lighter version of it? Play this one. A heavier one. Play this. But For a long time, there was nothing. This whole idea. Scotland Yard has no luck. None. You're just out trying to outguess Mr. X. I guess the only luck is starting positions. So I guess there's that. But other than that, there's no luck. Way ahead of its time. Scotland Yard.
I have never played Scotland Yard. This might be my rummy cube.
Oh, well, I would tell you to play it at the retreat, but the retreat's over.
I'll at the next one. The next one.
You're gonna have a list a mile long by the next one.
Number 5.
My number 5 is Bus, the Splatterspellen game, which many people think of as a pick up and deliver game. There have been tons of pick up and deliver games. This is not a trailblazer in pick up and deliver. Bus is a trailblazer in worker placement. It's one of the first games in my timeline to be doing that. You have 20 action cubes at the beginning of the game. You have to place at least 2 to do stuff, but you can place more, so you can run out of actions before other players in the course of the game. Now worker placement is huge. There's tons of it, but Bus did it, and then not a lot of other did it, and then showed up a whole bunch of worker placement.
All right, I need to ask you some questions here. How does the worker placement in this game work? Is there action selection where you place a worker on an action and they take that action?
Yes. You have a row of actions. It's placing businesses on the board, placing routes, expanding your bus line, scoring points, the vroom action. There's also a time machine. And you place your cubes on those actions, and then they resolve in a particular order.
Interesting. But you don't block someone else from taking that action.
Oh, you very much do, depending on... Some of them only have one position, and then the others...
Wait. I'm seeing them. I'm looking at pictures of this game, and it's hard to see them because it's so ugly.
Sure, and then they execute in a certain order. So you might place first, but then you end up executing certain actions last. It all depends on what you're trying to do.
Oh, okay, because my number 5 is way out west. Because of action, it's a worker placement game.
Worker placement game, yep.
And there was no other worker placement games that came out for a long time, except, I just looked it up, and Bus came out in 1999, and Way Out West came out in 2000.
Woo, I win! No,
So
I did see Way Out West show up on the list, too.
I thought it was original. Oh, okay. Well, I did not play Bus because it looks ugly. But I do know Eric likes it a lot. So that's interesting that we both picked that, though.
Yeah.
So they were both ahead of their time. And because it took so long for this to catch on, and it's such a great mechanism. Worker placements, I mean, it's used in like every other game, it seems, these days. And here, both these, I don't know about Bus. You still like Bus a lot. Way Out West feels clunkier now than it did back then. I was like, wow, this is a neat idea. You can go to this spot and no one else can take that spot and you can do an action. But next turn I get to go first so I can pick that spot. What a cool idea. But there was some, fighting between the cowboys and stuff, and also very low quality components. I really liked it at the time. Nowadays it's just okay. It hasn't aged well almost 22 years later. But you still like Bus and you would play it now.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, but Eric is weird, so keep that in mind. Folks.
Eric is weird. Keep that in mind.
That's a good. That's your new tagline. All right, so that's Bus and Way Out West for number 5s. Cool.
Number 4.
My number 4 is a game called Vinci, or I guess if I'm being specific with Latin, it would be Vinci, V-I-N-C-I. This is an area control game where you draft powers for your factions. You sort of draft from column A and column B and put them together, and that's your player powers as you work your way on the board, and then that civilization can go into decline, and you can bring out new ones. Vinci had mild success as a Euro game when it showed up, but it wasn't for several years when it went into decline, metaphor, and reemerged as Small World, that Vinci really turned into the game that was embraced and really became a hit as Small World, with tons of variations and deluxe editions and all of that. But it wasn't this action or the power drafting. It worked. It had mild success, but it just didn't really click until Days of Wonder got its hands on it and it became Small World. So my number 4 is Vinci or Vinky.
So, yeah, I thought about this one, actually. This one crossed my mind. I just didn't pick it because, I mean, it's a great idea. I think Small World does it 10 times better. But I just don't know what other games kind of do the same thing.
Yeah.
So maybe, again, this is another one that's still ahead of its time.
Could be. I really just liked the Resurrection story, and I didn't want to leave it off the list.
My number 4 is higher on Eric's list, which is fine because we work together.
Number 3.
Number 3 is the trailblazer in programmed movement. That is Robo Rally, the game with the robots. I was surprised at how few programmed movement games there were after Robo Rally. There was very little. Robo Rally came out in the mid-90s, and there wasn't much. There were some war games that used programmed movement, but we really didn't see programming show up until the 2000s or so. And Robo Rally was the trailblazer. It had its own hit. It had expansions and folks that embraced it, but it did eventually decline and go out of print, and it was hard to get for a while until newer editions showed up. And now there are tons of games where you get to program stuff and lay those down, then see how your program turns out. But for a while, Robo Rally was the only one. It's my number 3.
Yeah, this is another one I thought about. I actually considered quite a few games here, but I don't know. Yeah, it's good. It's a good choice. I just didn't put it on my list.
Mm-hmm.
My number 3 is Eric's number. Oh no, it's not on your list.
No,
Sorry.
I didn't put. This was close. I thought about it, but I didn't put it on my list.
So it's Tales of Arabian Nights, which I've heard rumors of a sequel. But anyway, Tales of Arabian Nights.
Those rumors of a sequel have been around since the first one came out.
Eric, I've heard stronger rumors of a sequel.
Sure, I'll believe it when I see it.
All right, I'm just saying that's what I've heard.
All right.
And I've heard them recently.
Okay.
As in very recently. Anyhow.
Earlier today.
Tales of Arabian Nights, not today. Tales of Arabian Nights is a paragraph storytelling game, which incidentally, I just talked about one. Role Player Adventures is the same kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But Tales of Arabian Nights, there was nobody making these games back then. And probably because it's a really tough game to make. I mean, Zima made the one in 2009, but the original version of this came out in 1985.
Mm-hmm.
These storytelling games are all over the place now. So many. They're fun. They're great. You find them from anywhere. A Card in Gloomhaven and other games. But there was very few of them. Tales of Arabian Nights was way ahead of its time in this regard. And that's why it's my number 3.
Yeah, another good selection. I guess this probably would be my number 11. Yeah, I don't have a good reason for leaving it off the list. It's an excellent selection and a trailblazer in that no one was doing it. Now we see a lot more with the Ryan Lockett games and some other storybook style games. But Tales of the Arabian Nights was on its own for a long time.
Number 2.
My number 2, I'm a little surprised didn't show up on Tom's list. This was the trailblazer for the traitor mechanism, Shadows over Camelot. A cooperative game, ostensibly a cooperative game, except one of the players, one of the Knights of the Round Table, could be working against you. Not necessarily, but one of them can be taking actions that are against the group. Again, Shadows had its mild success. It had an expansion or two and a card game version, if I recall correctly. But now we see tons of traitor games. Battlestar Galactica, I think, was the game that really made it take off. Shadows, mild success, but Battlestar really made it take off. And now we have all sorts of social deduction style and semi-cooperative games that have a traitor. It almost seems weird when there isn't a traitor in the game to have a straight-up co-op. Dead of Winter being another one where someone can be working against the group, either secretly or overtly. But Shadows did it first, and that's the number 2. Shadows over Camelot.
That's a good point. I didn't put it on my list because of your number 1. Werewolf might have done Traitor first, but that's not a very good example. You're right. That's a good reason. We'll call this my number 11.
Okay.
My number 10 is StarCraft. Yes, StarCraft. Now, this one's a very odd choice. And that's because, and we'll come up to this again when later on when the People's Choice, but StarCraft came out in 2007. And I'm just going to spoil the People's Choice. For their number 14, you put Dominion, which came out in 2008 as the first deck builder. Dominion is technically the first deck builder. Well, I mean, no, Dominion is the first deck builder, but technically StarCraft is.
Yeah.
And StarCraft did this, and no one even noticed. It went by. There was a little bit of deck building in this game. You added things, but it also did a bunch of other aspects in this game about putting down tokens for movement, which hadn't been done before. All this stuff was used in later games, but I just find it interesting. StarCraft, a game that I would not probably play today. It's too long. There's some really good aspects in it, and they made Forbidden Stars, which is a much better game. But I think it was ahead of its time. So that's StarCraft.
StarCraft was my number 10 as well, for the exact same reason. It did deck building before the deck building craze, which is interesting. I remember being taught StarCraft and going, wait, so we get these cards in our deck, and then when we shuffle, we get those cool cards back again? That's neat. I like that. And I didn't realize how much farther ahead of Dominion it was. But you're right. StarCraft sort of hit, and then not much happened. In fact, I think there were expansions that got announced and never produced for StarCraft. But yeah, Trailblazer right there. My number 10, Tom's number 2, StarCraft.
And finally, number 1.
My number 1 showed up in Tom's number 4 slot. This is the grandfather of the cooperative game. Many people think of that being Pandemic. That was really the first big hit. But The Lord of the Rings from Reiner Knizia was cooperative before cooperative was cool. And you're working together to try and get the ring into Mount Doom. You're passing it around like a football based on everyone's corruption level, drawing tokens from a bag to see if you can complete tasks and avoid the nastiness of Sauron. There were several expansions to this game, and it got a lot of playtime in my group as well. But it didn't really kick off the cooperative craze the way that Pandemic did. So that's why it was ahead of its time. And my number 1, The Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons I wasn't thinking about the trader aspect of Shadows over Camelot, but this one is just a weird one to me, that it took so long for this to catch on.
Yeah.
Lord of the Rings was a game that it wasn't like the game wasn't popular. It
right.
was. We talked about it. The game that changed the industry was Pandemic.
Right.
Pandemic was the one that just did phenomenally. In fact, as a side note, I was talking to Zev about Pandemic, about how that changed the industry, and he said the initial print run was 3,000 games.
Is
and
that all?
Sold out immediately, and he thinks the game, because that was somehow it had kind of a slow burn. Like Pandemic didn't blow the gates off immediately, that it took a few years, and then it just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and that was one of the reasons, was because there wasn't that many.
There just wasn't enough there, yeah. I remember as soon as I played that game, I was like, I have to own this game. I need to play this with everyone.
But Lord of the Rings did it first, and I would argue that Lord of the Rings is not as good as modern cooperative games. But they've had hundreds of games to learn from. Mm-hmm. Lord of the Rings is a solid game, but it has some problems. It's very, very straight narrative. There's not a lot of main decision points. The game can kind of run a little bit on rails because, it's following a story that runs on rails.
It helps to have the more experienced player is going to end up running the table, I think, more, just because they know what's coming up.
Sure. But that being said, yes, still way ahead of its time. I mean, when you think about the fact that Pandemic came out in 2008, that was an 8-year difference there. Mm-hmm. So that's just an odd thing for me. So yeah, Lord of the Rings was my number 4 and Eric's number 1. My number 1, no question here, folks. And I'm not trying to stick one of my favorite games in every list, but Cosmic Encounter, it's just clearly ahead of its time.
Sure.
And I thought about putting Dune, and I don't think it's a cheat there in a sense to put one of the or the other. Because they're designed by the exact same people. Cosmic Encounter came out first. Dune came out in 79. And Cosmic came out in 77. But again, it was 95, almost 20 years later, that Magic came out. And that blew the doors off the industry. Cosmic Counter was kind of like a cult classic, still is in many ways. It's very popular, obviously. But yeah, I mean, player powers, negotiation, just so few games did what it did. And I'll try to make the next several lists so I can't stick Cosmic Encounter in them. I'm not doing that on purpose. That's just the way it worked out.
Oh, no, I agree. There's a lot of elements of Cosmic, and you almost can't put it in one bucket as a trailblazer in that regard, because it just did so many things, and there was just nothing like it for many years. So, yeah, I'm just letting my less enthusiastic reaction to Cosmic rule me on that one. That's why it's not on my list.
All right, let's take a look at the People's Choice. Number 20, you said Carcassonne. And again, I know a lot of these are just going to be the first ones of a genre.
I didn't actually look at tile laying and see if there were other tile laying games. I feel like there were others, and there were some that appeared almost immediately after Carcassonne. So, yeah. 19 is Tales of Arabian Nights. 18, Caelus. Made my short list, but I think there were plenty of worker placements after Caelus.
Caelus is, again, the one that kicked the door in.
Yeah.
Way Out West and Bust did it first, but Caelus was the one that made it popular.
Yep.
17, Can't Stop. I mentioned that already with Sid Saxon.
Sure.
16, Dixit.
That's a good selection.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. That definitely was the first of that genre. Then that genre has really taken off recently.
But for a while, like the interesting art aspect of party or intellectual party games was ruled by Dixit alone for a while.
Number 15 is Risk Legacy. I thought about this one for a long time.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know if Risk Legacy was ahead of its time. Again, it's the first. It's the one that made us think about it. Pandemic Legacy obviously made it popular. Same designer. There still is not a ton of Legacy games out there.
I feel like we got Pandemic Legacy pretty soon after Risk, though. I don't remember
I guess
what the
if there's
actual
one thing
spread
that
was.
Risk Legacy did, and spoiler if that you care about this, was the secret envelope in the box.
No, yeah. Yep.
And there's a lot of games that do that now.
Yep.
Ignacy Trzewiczek draws secret pictures in his boxes. So, all right. 14 was Dominion. I disagree on this one. It was the first deck builder, but there was another deck builder like 4 months later.
Right.
13, Magic Realm. I disagree on this one too because it was a dungeon crawl as a board game. So you could say it was ahead of its time, but it did it in such a poorly difficult, over-the-top, war-gamey style that no one has really tried to recreate this at all.
It's not that designer's best work anyway.
Speaking of that, number 12 is Survive. Same designer. This one I would agree with.
Hey, Future Eric here, just to pop in to say that what Tom just said is factually incorrect, but past Eric is going to correct it in a little bit in the future. That's still the past. Really, I just wanted you to note that I know that it's coming up and it's going to be corrected, and I didn't want you to start writing an angry email and then find out that past Eric fixes it. So really, that's all I have to say. Back to past Tom and Eric.
Survive came out a long time ago, but it still holds up well today.
Okay.
11, Diplomacy. I would have put this on my list, except I hate it. But I do agree. There's another one from the 50s that was doing mechanisms that still work well today. Another good choice was the People's Choice number 10, Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective. Again, this one kind of mind boggles me that no one else tried to do this for a really long time. This might even be a precursor to Tales of Arabian Nights. I don't know. I have to look at the dates. 9 is Go. Come on now. What am I supposed to say here? Yes, you're correct.
It's ahead of its time. It was the only board game for a while.
Number 8 is Magic the Gathering. Again, as soon as it came out, it was the first. It's groundbreaking and innovative, but instantly there was 50 other deck builders.
It was the beginning of the wave for sure.
7 is Chronicles of Crime. which, how do we know? It's too new for me to tell on that one.
Yeah, well, as far as like the QR code aspect, I don't know how long it stayed on its own, though. It seemed like lots of these styles of games showed up quickly.
Number 6, though, is interesting to me, is Alchemists.
That might be true. Because it was app-based, a lot of the app-based deduction. I don't think there were many games that did what Alchemists does right away. Maybe more so than Chronicles of Crime.
Number 5 is Dune. Okay, that makes sense.
Yep.
Number 4 is Tigris and Euphrates. That's a good choice. I like that one. Number 3 is Catan, which is really hard to tell because Catan just swept the industry. So there was a lot of copycats. Right. Number 2 is Acquire, and number 1, Cosmic Encounter.
I think you win more of the people's choice on this one, Tom.
I don't know though. I'm still bugged by that Bus versus Way Out West thing.
Quick note on one thing that you said there, Tom. Survive is not the same designer as Magic Realm. Magic Realm is Richard Hamblin, and Survive is Julian Cortland Smith.
You're right. I was thinking of Merchants of Venus. That's what I was thinking of.
Yes, indeed.
Alrighty. It's because Stronghold reprinted was trying to reprint all 3 of those games. That's why that was in my head.
Sure.
Alrighty. Well, all right. Then my segue there made no sense, but my segue now will make sense because we're done, Eric. Let's end this episode. Thanks everybody for listening. Come on back. Mandy Suzanne, our next episode, but we'll be back in 740 in a couple weeks. So we got a pretty big announcement we'll be making then. So come on by and listen up.
And perhaps even a check-in at PAX. I might be recording a couple things. We'll see how that goes.
Well, that'd be fun.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, until next time, I'm Tom Vassell.
I'm Eric Summerer.
And you've been listening to The Dice Tower.
Thanks for listening. Promotional consideration has been provided by game publishers in the form of review copies of games. This episode number 738 was recorded on November 27th, 2021. Mandy and Suzanne are with you next week, and in 2 weeks, Tom and I share our top 10 surprises from the year 2021. Support for this podcast comes from listeners like you. Thank you for spreading the word. And speaking of support, the Jack Vassell Memorial Fund is dedicated to providing support to members of the board gaming community in their hour of need. Find out more about the fund's mission and how you can help at jackvassell.org. The Dice Tower is produced by Tom, Mandy, Suzanne, and Eric, with production assistance from Roy Kennedy, Mike DeLisio, Chris Yee, and Rob Siri. Our theme was composed by Timothy Pinkham. Your Rastafarian friend's reaction to your crazy antics brought to you by Monumental. And hosting is provided by Game Nerds, your all-in-one solution for all your nerdy needs at GameNerds.com. We love feedback. Visit the Dice Tower Guild at BoardGameGeek.com. Email us at tom@Dicetower.com or eric@Dicetower.com, or follow us on Facebook. And of course, you can find more from the Dice Tower Network, including Board with Video Games, Meeple Overboard, Solosaurus, Sporadically Board, Flip Flory's Super Saturday Board Game Serial, Board Game Design Lab, and Dice Tower Now at DicetowerNetwork.com. Until next time, from all the gang at the Dice Tower, have fun gaming. So if one is a trailblazer ahead of their time, do you need special equipment to be a trailblazer, like a machete?
Meh. Two machetes,
yes. Because the first guy only had one, and that didn't go well.
The first guy just sharpened his fingernails.
Oh.